What is up, guys? I'm Marcellus Williams, aka TheSwolefessor, educational health and social well-being, and today I want to talk to you guys about how to make your training more consistent. And this is a very simple but important topic, because if you can make your training more consistent, you're going to make your results more predictable. If your results are more predictable, that's going to be better data for you to carry over onto your actual meet days on the platform where it really counts, right? Because we all know, we've all been through an experience where we have really good bouts of training, or maybe a blog goes really, really well, but we're not exactly sure why. Even though programming variables seem consistent, it's these little things that we can do both inside the gym, outside the gym, and then even programming wise, which are the three ways we're gonna be breaking this topic down pretty much, is that what you can do in the gym to make your training more consistent, what you can do outside the gym to make your training more consistent, and what you can do programming wise to make your training more consistent. So that way you actually have an idea of what type of results you're gonna get, and then you can replicate that going into game day when it comes to your meet. So with that being said, hopefully a lot of what I'm about to go over isn't going to be anything like brand new or groundbreaking. I'm hoping a lot of this stuff is kind of more just like reminders, or maybe like you've heard about this type of stuff before, but it's a different way of looking at it. And at the end of the day, guys, what's optimal for somebody is going to come down to the individual. So keep that in mind, that a lot of this stuff that I'm putting out there is to give you a general guideline of things to kind of look at, or things to try to account for or adjust. But it's going to come down to you as the individual, or you and your coach, to work out, okay, how do we take this information and apply it to my specific scenario? But with that being said, let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the things we can do outside the gym to make training more consistent. And we're going to kind of break that down into 4 subcategories. All right, guys, so number 1, when we get into things we can do outside the gym to make our training more consistent, is of course going to be your nutrition. Now, this is a quick and obvious one. Obviously in terms of hey, are you tracking your calories? Are you tracking your macros, getting enough carbs, getting enough protein? But beyond that, I want to talk about also your micronutrition, which is the simple basis of, are you getting your fruits in? Are you getting your vegetables in? Are you getting those vitamins and minerals in that we know are going to have a positive impact both on your health, but overall performance as well? It doesn't make any sense to leave any stone unturned, especially when it comes to something as simple as that, right? Even if it gives you like a 1% boost in your performance, why not do that, right? So when it comes to things like your micronutrition, that's something you also want to be on top of. But what I really want to focus on, since most of that's obvious, me and many other coaches have covered the importance of nutrition and stuff like that, I want to talk more about the timing of your nutrition. Now, when I say this, I'm not defaulting to the idea of hey, you need to make sure that you're eating a big meal before you train, or getting a lot of carbs and protein in before you train. In general, yes, that's true. On paper, that's going to be most optimal for most people. Training, with some type of carbs in your system versus training on, fasted or an empty stomach is going to be better for most people. However, when it comes to applying this to the aspect of being consistent with your training, it's about finding what works best for you. So my general recommendations, if you're somebody where you train anywhere from midday to later in the evening, yes, make sure you have a meal in before you train. Now, how big that meal is, or what all is in that meal, is going to come down to you. Whatever you tend to do consistently and find that, hey, if I eat this before I train, or it makes me feel better, then do so. And then also be consistent with the timing of it. If you know that, hey, if I try to eat 30 minutes before I train, I feel very bloated, or I'm gonna throw up, I feel like I can't brace properly, don't do that. If you need to eat an hour before you train and that's what feels best for you, do that consistently. If you wanna eat 2 hours before you train because you find that has you feeling better, do that consistently. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're somebody where you train earlier in the day, let's say noon or earlier, maybe train early in the morning, and you find that if you try to force food down before you train, you just don't feel good at all, then don't do that. Make sure that you're eating a good amount of food, the night before, get a nice big meal in, and kind of just let that carry over for you going into your training the next day. Now, a lot of people are gonna be like, oh, that's not optimal, you should eat before you train. I'm somebody where I know for me, it's all about what time of day I'm training. If I'm training midday or later, then yes, I need something in my system before I train. But what I found is if I'm training early in the day and I try to eat something big beforehand, I don't feel good. I usually end up wanting to throw it up as well. And if that's you, that's okay. Just do what I do and eat a lot the night before so you don't feel depleted going into your session the next day. So when it comes to your nutrition, it's going to be about, of course, getting enough calories in, but also the timing of when you eat, how soon you eat before you train, whether that's the night before or the day of, and just being consistent with that. Try different things, find what works for you, and keep that going. Regardless of what anybody else is doing with their eating, that's a simple way to help make your training more consistent. And then try to kind of match how you would eat on specific days with kind of how you would on a meet day, right? In terms of usually if you're in the USAPL, then after your weigh-ins, you have 2 hours to eat. So that's why I usually tell people to try to if you are gonna eat before you train, try to keep in that hour to 2 hour window, because that's gonna be better. And if you're somebody where you're gonna have to worry about making weight because you're chilling, at the bottom or the middle of the weight class, so you just, eat a lot the night before, then you wake up and then you go do your thing, then that's fine too. Just keep it consistent, because that's the whole point, right? right? So that's the first part of the outside of gym variables. Is simply going to be your nutrition. All right, guys, the next part is going to be sleep. Obviously, we already know getting a lot of sleep is important, as well as the quality of sleep, right? I try to tell my clients, bare minimum, try to get in 7 hours. If you're getting 8, 9, 10 hours a night, that's great. For a lot of people, that's just not realistic based upon job flexibility, scheduling, having kids, things like that. But if you can get around 7 hours, that's great. If you're closer to that, that 5 to 6 range, because that's what you can get, all right? But obviously we know that we want to try to get as much sleep as possible and make sure that it's deep quality sleep. With that being said, what I'm focusing on more when it comes to, consistency of your training isn't so much, how much sleep you're getting. It's more so the consistency of what time you go to sleep and what time you wake up. That plays a big role. What I found with a lot of my clients is even if they only get, say, 6 or 7 hours, but they consistently go to bed and wake up at the same time, they tend to feel a lot better compared to somebody where their sleeping is more sporadic. Maybe they do get 8 to 9 hours of sleep, but it's always random. Sometimes they go to bed at 10 p.m., sometimes they go to bed at midnight, sometimes they go to bed at 2 in the morning. Getting your body in a consistent groove of when you sleep and when you wake up is probably gonna help you feel better and more productive with your day, period, because you have more of a structured schedule, but it's really gonna help you when it comes to your training as well. And when it comes to the timing of the sleep, the reason why this also matters is because I like to have my clients make sure they're accounting for, okay, how soon did you train from the time you woke up? Usually if you wake up and then you go to the gym within an hour of when you woke up, you feel like you're still kind of waking up because you haven't really moved around, which is kind of going to lead into a completely another topic when it comes to the outside of the gym variables. But usually I tell my clients to try to make sure you've been up and about for at least a couple of hours before you train, just so you can move around a little bit and so that you can kind of wake up from the grogginess of however much sleep you did or didn't have. It just kind of lets you get moving, get in the groove, and prepare yourself for training in and of itself, right? So that's the main thing I want you guys to focus on when it comes to consistency of the sleep. Even if you only can get 5, 6, 7, however much hours, try to go to bed at the same time each night, or if nothing else, like every Monday, make sure you go to bed at the same time. Every Tuesday, make sure your Tuesdays are going to bed at the same time. Try to have as much consistency as you can with that, so that way you're waking up around the same time as well, and that's going to give you a more consistent groove with your outside training variables, which is going to lead into the next factor, which is going to be stress levels. Now, when I'm talking about stress, obviously we can't always control everything that happens to us, right? But what we can put a focus and emphasis on is managing our stress as best as what we possibly can. So something simple that I like to tell my clients to do is before they go train, even if it's only 15 to 30 minutes, ideally if you can have an hour or so, that's even better, but just take 15 to 30 minutes to kind of chill and decompress before you go train. Now, for a lot of people, that's not realistic, right? Because maybe with your schedule, you have to go to the gym as soon as you get off work. Well, if that's the case, fine. When you're driving from work to the gym, play some music that's relaxing for you. Listen to something that's relaxing. Watch a quick comedy skit, something that's gonna kind of put you in a better headspace. Because what I found for myself and other clients is if I try to go train right after working, like let's say I have a bunch of client checks and writing a whole bunch of blocks. If I go straight from doing that to training, training feels more like a chore, like something else to do in my list of tasks. Whereas if I take the time, 30 minutes to an hour when I'm done with that last check-in or write that last block before I go train, to kind of just sit and chill and decompress, then it goes from, oh God, I just got done doing this, now I gotta go train, to, all right, cool, I'm done with this, I get to chill and relax, oh man, and then I get to go train. You know what I mean? Even something like that can help shift your mindset and make the training better. When you look forward to your training and your training becomes something that's more enjoyable for you, which, mind you, no matter how much we love training, even I myself, we all have days where we don't necessarily feel like going. But what I found is that helps me a lot more versus doing a bunch of things back to back to back and then having to go train. Train just becomes this list of things to do, like part of that list of things to do, those tasks that along with like your work, whatever responsibilities you have, instead of it becoming something that you kind of look forward to doing, that you kind of take the time to mentally get set for. And that's another thing too, especially when it comes to your heavier training days, being able to have that time to kind of chill and relax and get your mind ready for those heavier weights tends to be something that I find helps, just makes my training more consistent, versus when I don't do that, then it can kind of be like, we'll see how the day goes once I get into the gym. So that's something else on top of that is your stress levels. And that's also why the sleep thing kind of matters, because once again, if you wake up and then immediately go to the gym, you don't really have time to get into that proper headspace, right? Whereas if you wake up and have an hour or two to kind of like just, get moving, going about your day and kind of prepare for that mentally, that's gonna help a lot. And that's gonna lead into the fourth and final thing when it comes to your outside training variables, which is simply movement, which also goes back to why I said, hey, try to wake up and be up and about for at least an hour or two before you go train. The more you move around before you get in the gym, the better you're gonna feel. If you just wake up and you've been sedentary for like 8 hours laying down, or even if you've been sitting at work behind a desk for a certain amount of time, that's not going to necessarily feel great on the body. Like the more you can move around, the better you're probably going to feel, and that's just gonna help make your training more consistent as well too. Obviously, when you get to the gym, you can do your warm-up routine, you can do your drills, get on the bike, all that type of stuff, but just moving around more in general throughout the day, especially like, that hour, 2 hour time frame before you go train, it's just gonna have the body feeling better and thus make things a little bit more consistent as far as that. All right, next we're gonna be talking about our in the gym variables. These are things that we can do inside of the gym to help make training more consistent as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is caffeine consumption and intake. So I'm personally somebody where I'm a big believer in doing this, and everyone's a little bit different. There's always exceptions, right? Because you have different tolerances, but I'm a big believer in only pretty much using caffeine or pre-workout on my primary days or my heaviest days of training. The reason being is that more often than not, if you are somebody where you start to use caffeine or pre-workout every single training session, especially if you're somebody where you train, midday to later in the evening, that's probably going to impact your sleep. Once again, different people have different tolerances. Some people, they can have some amount of caffeine and they sleep just fine. For me and many of my clients, if we have to take caffeine, even take it early in the day, it can mess with our sleep later in the day. So even more so if we have to train like midday or later in the evening. So what I found for me is from simply only taking caffeine on that primary day, one, I kind of know what expected result I'm going to get from it because I only do it on that day, right? And it also will just allow my sleep to be better. So in this way, kind of this in the gym variable kind of impacts an outside the gym variable, being sleep. So that's something that I try to get my clients to do is like, hey, if it's a secondary day or tertiary day, or like a lighter technique focused day or volume-based day, you don't necessarily need caffeine or pre-workout every time. Now, a lot of people's mindset is like, oh, but I want to maximize the session, maximize performance. By the end of the day, it's not about what we do, it's about what we can recover from. If you go in and you're on, you take caffeine for every single workout and you're crushing your workouts, that's great. But if your sleep is then garbage later that night because of it, you don't even get the full benefits of that workout because you're not gonna fully recover from it. So that's something that I like to do, is to have my clients only take pre-workout or caffeine on their main primary day. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about caffeine specifically for your workout. If you're somebody where you have coffee every day, I'm not telling you necessarily to cut that out. I'm talking about the caffeine that you take specifically for your workouts, whether it's, additional caffeine through pre-workouts, energy drinks, whatever it may be. I'm a big believer in trying to keep that on the primary day. One is so that you can even be more prepared for like that experience, like on meet day, like you're getting that extra boost. It kind of just even mentally can make you feel like, okay, hey, it's the primary day, it's the heavy day, this is the day that's like practice for the meet day. I'm gonna take my caffeine and be zoned in as far as that. Whereas on your other days, not having the caffeine, you can still come in with the same focus, the same intention, but once again, you're probably just gonna sleep better, as well as it might be a good thing that you're not so zoned in and overhyped to where you're pushing things too much on those secondary days, which is going to go into the next topic, which is going to be hype, which is also like, an in the gym variable. So kind of the same mindset when it comes to hype, not even just on like, primary days, but I tend to try to save like the most amount of like hype that I kind of use for that heaviest day of the block. Just because once again, it can be very tiring and draining if you're having to get yourself wired and hyped for every single workout and every single session. It can also make it hard to be as predictable with your results, because if you come in and let's say it's a secondary day and you get super hyped and you get super excited and you feel good, so you push things super hard that day, well, you might pay for that a little bit later when it comes to your next heavy primary day. You might feel a little bit more drained and gassed, right? And even more so if you're doing that all the time. I don't think people really account for the fact that getting hyped takes a lot of energy. Like getting yourself wired and getting yourself like in that certain headspace can take a whole lot of energy. So learning to be able to actually lift calm more often than not is a good thing to do. It's also a good skill that carries over to the platform, because even when we're getting hyped, we want to learn how to internalize and focus that hype into our performance. We don't want to get so overhyped to where we start, doing things like, not listening to commands, or start rushing through our setup, or having a whole bunch of technique breakdown. Like, you want to learn how to control your hype. So a good way of doing that is practicing it in the gym, or just you learn to approach things more calmly. And when it's time for like those bigger, heavier loads, that's when you kind of like, get yourself more hyped for your lifting. So learning how to control your hype kind of goes hand in hand with the caffeine thing. You don't have to take caffeine every single session. You don't need to get yourself super hyped every single session either. All right, sorry about that, guys. Camera's about to die, so I had to get that charged up. But anyway, we're gonna go into the next topic for the the next topic for the in the gym variables, which is going to be rest time. So this is a really simple, easy one, and I know that a lot of powerlifters are guilty of this, and that's simply resting too long in between your sets. We have to keep in mind when it comes to meet day, right? how fast you're gonna get through like your attempts is gonna determine about how many people are in your flight, right? If it's a longer flight, like you got 10 to 14 lifters, all right, cool. And then approximately you might have about 10 to 14 minutes between each attempt. But the fact of the matter is oftentimes you might be in a shorter flight. So it's a lot better, in my opinion, to be prepared for shorter rest times between your attempts versus expecting your rest times to be longer, right? So at the end of the day, if you're used to shorter rest times and then you like have slightly longer rest times, that's probably gonna play more to your advantage. Like, yeah, there's the whole concept like, oh, what if I get cold? But ideally, if the flight's not insanely long, you don't have to worry about that. Whereas more people do have to worry about the fact of, well, I'm used to resting longer and oh crap, now I don't get as long of rest, right? So simply timing your rest is important. There's really not a reason that you should be chilling 15 to 20 minutes between your warm-ups to your top set or between your top set and your back down sets. That's just excessive. Like, yes, rest long enough to get the workload done, but the fact of the matter is, really 5 minutes, 5 to maybe 8 minutes should be plenty of time to rest in between sets. Now, if it's your last warm-up, it's your heaviest day of the block and you want to get like 10 minutes to just get focused in before you take your top set, that's fine. But if you're resting 10 minutes plus between every single set, you're not getting your body acclimated to being ready to lift certain loads back to back to back. And we see this happen all the time on the platform where people just seem to kind of gas out with loads that they were able to take just fine in training because of the mere fact that they are not used to, having shorter rest times. So that's a very simple, quick, easy fix, is simply actually tracking your total rest time when it comes to your training. Like get an idea of how long you're resting, when it comes to your warm-up sets, to your top set, get an idea of how long you rest between your top set and your first back down, and then have an idea of how long you're resting between your back down sets, and just make sure it's not too excessive. All right, guys, so point number 4 when it comes to the in the gym training variables is simply going to be timing when you actually go train, being consistent with what time you train. So even though this may seem like it's not as big a deal, it's one of these things where, once again, the body gets used to what you put it through. If you're somebody where you train midday most days, keep doing that. If you train later in the evening most days, keep doing that. If you like to train in the morning, keep doing that. Or at the very least, make sure that your training days of the week are consistent. For example, on Saturdays, I know that I usually like to train, starting at noon or no later than 1 p.m. and I try to keep that consistent. With Sundays, I usually train around 3, no later starting than 4 p.m. And on the weekdays, it's always usually pretty much at 3 or 4 p.m. And I try to keep that consistent. What I have found is when I change that, right? Like if I'm used to training, at a certain time of day, and then I just shift that for that day, I just don't feel as good. I don't always feel awful, but things just don't feel like they're quite clicking, in the same groove as usual. So that's a very simple thing that most people can do. Once again, most people's work schedules are somewhat consistent. So just making sure that, hey, you train at the usual time of days that you do is a very easy way of keeping your training more consistent. Because it's one of these things where, if you train a lot earlier than what you're used to, you're probably gonna once again feel like kind of wonky, like you're not fully awake. If you train a lot later in the day than what you're used to, you're probably gonna feel a little bit more tired and gassed, and it's like, man, why do I feel so tired? Well, because you're training later than what you're used to. You've probably done more throughout the day at that point in time than what you usually do, which makes sense, right? Because if you're training later in the day than what you usually do, there's probably a reason for that. So obviously, don't be overly strict with this. If you have to train earlier or later that day for an emergency or something family related or work related, that's okay, but to the best of your ability, just keep the time that you train as consistent as possible, because that's just one less thing you have to account for. And then on top of that, if you try to align, what time you train with the time that you're probably gonna be competing on the platform, that's very useful too. If you know that you're gonna be competing early in the morning, train early in the morning. If you're gonna be competing midday, train midday. If you're gonna be competing later in the prime time session, train later during around what time you'll be training for prime time. And that's a really simple and easy fix of making your training even more consistent, and it's gonna have very good carryover to the platform. All right, guys, and then lastly, we're gonna be going over programming considerations that will help make your training more consistent. Now, this is gonna be the one that's most individual, just because, different people program different ways based upon if you're doing your own thing, or if you have coaches. So some of this stuff might be a little bit hard to apply. Like for example, if you're not someone where you utilize primary days, but I'm kind of gonna, get into why I think everybody should be doing that anyway. But with that being said, for those of you where you do kind of follow this type of format, it's gonna be really easy to apply this and follow the line of thinking. So the first point when it comes to programming considerations to make your training more consistent is going to be aligning your primary day training with your meet day. So when I say your primary day, I'm pretty much talking about your heaviest work or highest exertion work of the week. For example, my heaviest days are on Saturdays. It's my primary SPD days. It's where I'm usually doing triples, doubles, or singles on squat, bench, and deadlifts, right? And the reason why I have it on Saturday is because I'm more often than not going to be competing on a Saturday. In some meets I might compete on a Sunday, but most meets fall on the weekend. So that's why I tend to have my heaviest day on Saturday. And some of my clients, if they don't do SBD days, maybe they do like, heavy squat and bench one day, heavy deadlift the next, or heavy squat and deadlift one day, heavy bench the next. It's still usually on the weekend, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Saturday, Sunday. I try to have it as close to the weekend as possible because that is the day you're going to be competing on. If you get your body used to lifting the heaviest work or doing your highest exertion work on that day, then you're already physically preparing yourself for meet days, right? Now, like with that being said, there's some people where they don't necessarily believe in the concept of primary days. They believe, oh, just push when you feel good. But the fact is, that's gonna make your training more inconsistent. You only have so much you can recover from at a time. You can only push so much so often. What we find is if somebody's like pushing every day super hard, balls to the wall, well then it gets really, really hard to recover. And then if you, for example, push like a secondary, tertiary day super, super hard, then you're probably not gonna come in and feel as strong on that primary day. And the reason why that matters is because, once again, you want to get yourself set up to feel good for your primary day work, because that's the work that's going to have the most carryover to the platform. It's not to say that your secondary, tertiary day work or your volume days don't matter. It all builds in together. But the whole goal with the way that usually I try to set up programming is we're trying to get all these days to feed into that heaviest primary day, to get our body to feel good and groove on that primary day. There's a lot of people where they have this mindset of like, oh, you can't control when you feel good, you feel good when you feel good. But like, no, you can't, because if you're putting your highest exertion, highest intensity work on a certain day, and then you're keeping the workload throughout the rest of the week more moderate or not as high exertion or high intensity, maybe until like the last week of the block, that's gonna set you up to be feeling better for that primary day. So that's the first and simplest thing, is just simply getting yourself in alignment with that. For example, this past national, since I knew that my weight class competed on Wednesday, I shifted my days to where my heaviest SBD day was on Wednesday, so my body can be more prepared for that, versus keeping it on Saturday, then letting Wednesday be, what it usually is for me, which is like SSBs and RDLs, and my body's used to doing that, right? And then I have to come into the meet week and try to lift heavy on a Wednesday when my body's not used to doing that. But because I took the whole prep to get my body acclimated to that, I felt and performed a lot better than what I probably would have if I would have kept my heavy work on Saturday, even though I compete on Wednesday. So that's the first point. The second point is going to be utilizing SBD days. Now, this isn't something that everybody has or needs to do. Once again, like I said, I have lots of clients where they do maybe like squat and bench heavy on one day and their heavy deadlift on another day, or some of my clients even have to have their heavy deadlift later in the week further away from their heavy squat work. So obviously it comes down to the individual, but what I found is for a lot of clients, having an SBD day is useful because it just has them primed for, once again, meet day. There's so many people where they'll say like, oh man, my deadlift feels good in training, but doesn't feel great in a meet because I'm not used to having to pull after squatting, or oh, my bench doesn't feel as good because I'm not used to benching after squatting. But if you have SBD days where you're doing like squat volume, bench volume, then deadlifts, well, that makes the meet day feel like nothing because you're just going in and doing 3 squats, 3 benches, and 3 deadlifts. So you're just getting your body more prepared and acclimated. Once again, not everybody needs this because not everybody has that issue or that complaint. Some people are able to have their heavy squat and bench one day, have their heavy deadlift another day or later in the week, and they still show up just fine come meet day. But if you're somebody where you find like you're kind of gassing out or not feeling as good after your squats feel fine, but then bench and deadlift feel awful because you're not used to pushing heavy loads of bench and deadlift after squatting, well, then you might want to start utilizing an SBD day, or at the very least having at least 2 of your movements together, whether it's squatting and deadlifting together or squatting and benching together. That's also why I like to have everything close in alignment with each other. Once again, there's exceptions. Some of my clients just do their schedules. They might have to do their heavy squat and bench on Monday and their heavy deadlift on Tuesday. That's fine, but the closer you can have it to the day you're actually competing and the closer you can have all those lifts together, usually the better result you're gonna get when it comes to that. All right, programming point number 3 is going to be keep your accessory work consistent. I know a lot of people were just due to the novelty factor, they like to switch their accessories out every single block. You are not going to get stronger on a movement if you're changing it every single block. I like to keep accessory work pretty consistent within a macro cycle. So if a macro cycle is 3 blocks long, I like to keep the accessory work consistent and just build momentum with that, the same way you would with the big 3. Then every time we go into a new macro cycle, then we can switch some things out. Obviously, if it's a movement that I know someone responds really well to, then I'll keep that in, period. Like if I know somebody's bench responds well to incline bench or to weighted dips, I'm keeping that in throughout the year, period. But there's other things you can probably have a little bit more novelty, like, oh, okay, we've been doing this hammer strength machine row, now we can switch it out for like seated cable row. That's fine. But in general, you want to have some consistency of your accessories because that's a training variable when it comes to your total volume and workload. So by keeping it more consistent, you're setting yourself up for more success versus if you switch it every single block. So you're just gonna build more momentum that way. In the same way you wouldn't want to switch variations every single week or every single block, don't switch your accessories every single block either. Just keep that consistent and that's gonna give you better results as well. And point number 4, which is gonna wrap back around to the whole idea of having primary days, as well as wrapping back around to not using caffeine or getting overly hyped for every single training session, is not pushing your secondary days excessively. So those of you who are my clients know what the kind of quote unquote craft method is. Weeks 1 through 3, when it comes to our secondary day work, I like to tell people to treat the RP as a cap and to even let themselves be comfortably under that RP cap until the final week of the block. That's when you can push everything to be true. In doing this, you're going to make sure your objective loads are manageable on the secondary day, so you're not over fatiguing yourself for the primary day and letting that primary day show up better. So the primary day, I tell my clients to seek to be true to the RP weeks 1 through 4, 1 through 5, 1 through 3, however long the block is, to be as true as possible. Set a range so you have an idea of where you should be. Based on the last warm-up, take what you think is going to be there as close to true to RP within that range on your primary days. But on the secondary days, kind of let yourself cruise close to or under the RP cap until the final week, because by the time you get to the final week, you've more than likely already gotten through your final primary day, and then you can go ahead and push that final secondary day to be as close to true as possible, because you're about to scale back into a new block anyway. And in doing this, you're setting yourself up for more success. If you push your secondary and tertiary days too hard, you're probably gonna over fatigue yourself for your primary days and not get the stimulus that you want as far as that. But beyond that, it also means that you're probably gonna shoot yourself in the foot as far as not feeling good later towards the end of the block when you have more high exertion work. Whereas if you let yourself kind of cruise on the secondary days, just get good steady load progression, and then you push everything to be true on that final week of the block, you're gonna find that you're hitting much better loads on your primary days, and then probably finish off heavier on your secondary days on that final week than what you would have if you went too heavy too early and kind of gassed yourself out beforehand. So these are simple programming variables that would make your training more consistent. Once again, if you're pushing secondary and tertiary days too hard and you went from like, oh man, I thought I was set to hit this projected range on my primary day, but man, I'm so gassed from what I just did a couple days ago on a secondary and tertiary day to where I wasn't able to do that. Well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because once again, you only have so much you can push and so much room for recovery. So we're trying to get things to be in alignment with that day that's gonna have the most carryover to the platform. So that's why, having primary days and secondary days structured, having tertiary days structured, knowing what days you're supposed to push more and what days are kind of just there for volume or for cruising is important, because it's going to allow your training to, once again, point this video, be more consistent. All right, guys, so that's pretty much it. Those are the main 3 categories within this topic. And of course, we broke those each down to 4 points. Hopefully that all made sense. Once again, these are kind of more general guidelines just to give you guys a direction of where you should be and kind of how you can look at things both outside the gym, inside the gym, and with your programming to make your training more consistent, because we want that consistency, we want that predictability so that we can have an idea of how things are gonna show up on meet day versus kind of just going and randomly filling things out the day of. We put way too much time and money into this over months to not be as consistent as possible and kind of have an idea of what type of results we're gonna get on the platform. So yeah, hopefully that all made sense. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go leave a comment down below, let me know what you did. If you're not, leave a comment down below, let me know what can be better. Like the video, share, subscribe. Keep it simple, specific, scientific. I'll catch you guys later.